The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call Grant Roberts.
Mr Speaker, what an outrageous proposal from the Minister. It's ridiculous at so many levels. The first of those is he's just acknowledged that the 1st of October is the date that this comes into force. So there's no way, because of the incompetent running of this House by the Leader of the House, that this bill can actually be passed by the 1st of October. So now we're going to have a bill reported back on the 22nd of October. It's already retrospective legislation. That's bad enough, Mr Speaker, but given that it's already retrospective legislation, why not have a full select committee process? Why not actually give the opportunity to New Zealanders to consider the bill properly, for the select committee to hear expert advice, to take the time to get the legislation right? It's not as if there's a rush to get it done by the 1st of October, because they've blown that already. Yeah, it won't work anyway, and we could actually spend some time in the Select Committee getting it right, but no, the government wants to sweep this away under the carpet. It wants to get it off the books before Christmas because they're embarrassed by this piece of legislation, and so they should be embarrassed by this piece of legislation. But having a report back date of the 22nd of October means we have a piece of retrospective legislation, but we're not even giving us the committee enough time to properly consider it. Mr Speaker, when the Standing Orders Committee decided that these kinds of truncation debates would take place, this is what they said. The truncation of the Select Committee process can have serious implications for legislative quality and confidence in the legislative process. That's the problem here, Mr Speaker. This action by the Minister in calling for such a short period of time for the Select Committee to consider this bill goes to the heart of that concern, the quality and the confidence in the legislative process. And what it does, Mr Speaker, is it raises the concern that many New Zealanders will have, having listened to the government speeches tonight, which is that the government doesn't really want this measure. It's window dressing at best, and it would prefer that there really wasn't a proper debate on this measure. And that's why we see a truncated Select Committee process to the 22nd of October. If they really wanted to get this right, they would take the 4 months, have a proper consultation, go around the country, get tax experts to work through the detail, look at the consequences, test it with international ideas, and then come back to the House with what I am sure would be a better bill. But they don't want that, Mr Speaker. They want to sweep this away under the carpet because they're embarrassed by it and they just want to look like they've done something right. Mr Speaker, the other part of the motion that I want to refer to is the question of when the committee will meet. This is Standing Orders 191, 194, 1B and C that have been suspended under this motion. It might be all very well for members on the other side of the House to say, well, we can meet on Fridays and, you know, we can have select committee meetings in the evenings and so on. Well, yeah, David Bennett says, what's the matter with hard work? The constituents of, I usually get this wrong, Hamilton East? Yes, the constituents of Hamilton East don't expect their MP to show up on a Friday because they've had David Bennett as their MP for some time. But in other parts of the country, they actually expect their MP to come in and do...
Oh,
no, ridiculous. They actually expect their MPs to show up on a Friday and be there in their constituencies. And here I want to speak on behalf of the smaller parties who are on the Finance and Expenditure Committee, who actually have limited numbers of members who can be available to do this, calls on their time in the House, because this Standing Order 1941B means that if this passes, we'll allow the committee to meet during a sitting of the committee, during the sitting of the House rather. A committee doing that means if you're from a small party, your resources are stretched very, very thin. This is a bill that's of significant interest to all parties in Parliament, Mr Speaker, and by setting this up, we actually set up quite an unfair process in terms of how many people will actually be able to be at the committee. We also have the ability to sit in evenings on a day in which there's been a sitting of the House, which a committee can't usually do. Again, MPs have other commitments. This is putting a lot of MPs in a position of not necessarily being able to attend all of the select committee meetings. We also know, Mr. Speaker, from previous experience with truncated select committee processes, that this will be used as an excuse by members of the government to limit the time for submissions. It'll be used as an excuse to limit the amount of time for people to put their submissions in, and then in terms of the amount of time that we have for hearings of submissions. That is not acceptable in a bill like this. We know that working through the implications of tax bills takes time. We've just had a bill passed in this House where IRD said they didn't have time to work out the compliance costs. They didn't have time to do a full consultation with those who were affected by the bill. And then we're going to repeat it all over again, Mr. Speaker, with this bill? We know we have independent tax advisors who support the Finance and Expenditure Committee. They often take a considerable amount of time to sit down with tax accountants, with tax experts, and then to debate the issues with the officials from the Inland Revenue Department. That debate often leads to better law. That's the nature of taxation work. It takes time to work out how it will be implemented. You know, how people like Mr. Bailey will organise their accountants to get around the latest tax initiative that comes out of this House. The tax officials and the tax experts who advise the Select Committee need the time to test those ideas out. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, we come back to the Standing Orders Committee's concern about legislative quality with truncated Select Committee processes. We could not get bills more needing a lengthy process than taxation bills. I would challenge any member of this House to have read through every page of every taxation bill that comes up. Sometimes they go over 1,000 pages. And the problem with that, Mr. Speaker, is that we rely so much on the officials having the time to get it right, to test the ideas out and to come back to us. And Mr. Speaker, we have not had any kind of argument in this House from the government to say why this should be different. This bill deserves It actually needs to be improved significantly, and it deserves the time in the Select Committee to get it right, and that is being denied today by the Minister. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we've supported this bill to the Select Committee. We've done that in good faith because we believe that this is an area where New Zealanders are crying out for the government to do something, to try and rein in the horrendous property speculation that's pushing so many New Zealanders out of the housing market. And this government is not giving us the opportunity to get that right. We have supported this bill in good faith. The good faith in return from the government would be to say, let's do this properly. Let's give it 4 months or even 6 months because it's going to be retrospective anyway. But they know it's a shambles once they make it retrospective, don't they? They know that all those people who are quickly trying to get in to avoid this will now be placed perhaps with a little bit more wiggle room if it goes on any longer. Mr. Speaker, we know on this side of the House that this is an important measure that has not been handled well by the government. New Zealanders and the rest of this Parliament are not responsible for Jerry Brownlee's disorganisation. And that's fundamentally what's happening here today, is that the Leader of the House has not organised himself sufficiently to get this bill passed by the 1st of October. We have retrospective legislation that is bad enough. Now we have a government that is not interested in hearing from New Zealanders, that simply wants to shove this through so they can get the embarrassment that it is out of the way. That is wrong, Mr. Speaker, and we need to make sure that as a group of parliamentarians, we do not allow that. Mr. Speaker, we are strongly opposed to the motion that has been put forward by the Minister. I think National Party members could do a much better job.
I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for me to leave the chair for the dinner break. This debate is interrupted and I shall resume the chair at 7:30.